Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tamika Brown-Megan, the Dean of the Harvard-Radcliffe Institute, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the annual Julia S. Phelps Lecture in the Arts and Humanities. This year, featuring acclaimed author and human rights advocate, Professor Jennifer Finney Boylan. Julia Phelps, for whom this series is named, was a Radcliffe College alumna and a beloved teacher in Harvard's German department, at the Harvard Extension School, and here at Radcliffe. When Julia retired, her family, friends, and colleagues established this lecture in her honor. We're grateful for their support, and I'm so pleased that Julia's daughter, Susan Phelps Napier, and her son-in-law, Stephen Coit, are here this afternoon. Welcome. I'm also very glad to welcome our speakers' family members who are joining us today. Finally, let me acknowledge members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all our annual donors whose contributions keep our programming free and open to the public. We thank you. A distinguished novelist, memorist, and short story writer, Jennifer Finney Boylan is an author of 18 books, most recently the best-selling novel Mad Honey, co-authored with Jodi Picoult. Jenny is also the inaugural Anna Quindlen Writer-in-Residence at Barnard College of Columbia University, as well as a member of the faculty of the Middlebury Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Saraland Writers Conference. Here at Radcliffe, Jenny is at work on a novel inspired by Amelia Earhart, while in residence as our 2022-23 Marilyn Beaudry Corbett Schlesinger Fellow. The book is centered on the experiences of three women at three key points in the history of American feminism. And to tell the story, Jenny is drawing on the Schlesinger Library's archives, where her own papers have resided for some time. As future Schlesinger researchers will discover, and as Jenny's many current readers already know, her work engages profoundly important subjects, including gender, family, love, and the ongoing struggle for transgender rights and acceptance. Her writing spans genres, from fiction to memoir to incisive opinion essays, which appeared for many years in the New York Times and now in the Washington Post. Jenny's also a nationally recognized advocate for human rights. She's a member of the Board of Trustees of PEN America and previously served as co-chair of the GLAAD Board of Directors. But Jenny didn't always see herself as an activist, a role she associated with direct protest rather than words on a page. Well, that's changed. As Jenny both tells and shows us, writing itself, telling stories, is a powerful tool for advocacy. She's described how in her own life, the key elements of storytelling, things like narrative and plot, helped her make sense of overwhelming life events. Stories also compel us to look beyond ourselves and to consider perspectives and lived experiences different from our own. As Jenny has explained, it is by making our stories known that other people can begin to understand our lives and the challenges we face. Her path-breaking 2003 memoir, She's Not There, A Life in Two Genders, is a striking example. With both humor and sincerity, the book explores Jenny's experiences coming out as transgender, and it meditates on the themes of identity, family bonds, friendship, and the transformation that's possible when one no longer bears the weight of a secret. The book became the first best-selling work by a transgender American and brought national attention to the experiences of transgender people, experiences still often overlooked or maligned. In the 20 years since She's Not There was published, Jenny has continued to encourage readers to seek understanding of themselves and of one another in pursuit of a more just and equitable society. Reflecting on story's transformative potential, she asks us, quote, "What's more revolutionary than telling your story in a way that opens people's hearts?" Today, we have the opportunity with Jenny to reflect not only on the power of stories, but also the writer's craft and the creative process, particularly the all-important process of revision and its resonance with how we become ourselves. After her remarks, Jenny will be joined in conversation by Richard Russo. Richard is the award-winning author of a memoir, 2 collections of stories, and 9 novels, including Empire Falls, for which he received the Pulitzer Prize in 2002. Several of his novels have been adapted for film and television, receiving critical acclaim. His next book, Somebody's Fool, will be released in July of 2023. After Jenny and Richard's conversation, we'll turn to audience questions. Whether you're watching in person or online, you can submit questions at any time using the Slido link that's provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat feature on the Zoom webinar. I'm thrilled to have both Jenny and Richard with us today, and now please join me in warmly welcoming Jennifer Finney Boylan to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Well, all right. You're all very welcome. And thank you for that lovely intro. All right, hit it, Glenn. Hermann Karl von Keyserling, for whom J.S. Bach wrote the Goldberg Variations, was once described as a cheerful man of sin who kept a harem of ladies, had 354 bastards, whose chief mistress was a daughter, and who died drunk. It's also said he had trouble sleeping at night, which is really understandable if you have 354 bastards. It's just 11 bastards short of 1 bastard for every day of the year. You can imagine our man tossing and turning at night, wondering which bastard was going to show up next. You've just heard the first 50 seconds of Glenn Gould's 1955 recording of the Goldberg Variations. It's a piece composed about 1740. It consists of this opening theme, followed by 30 variations, and then a repeat of that main theme again at the end. That note-for-note repetition of the aria at the very end is very moving, even though it's identical to the piece that opens the composition. By the time you get to the end, after hearing all 30 variations, you experience it differently, as if it's another piece entirely. Originally, the piece was composed for harpsichord. According to legend, the Goldbergs were written to help Count Keyserling with his insomnia. What with all the bastards and all the sin. Being a count, Keyserling had his own live-in harpsichordist, in the same way that a wealthy person in the 21st century might have a nanny or a dog walker or someone whose sole responsibility is operating the juice machine. I've never longed for my own harpsichordist, but in thinking about it now, I suppose it would be nice That way, if I wound up with any middle-of-the-night harpsichord emergencies, I'd be covered. What was the name of Count Kaiserling's live-in harpsichordist? Johann Gottlieb Goldberg. How old was Goldberg when he first played the variations for Count Kaiserling? He would have been 14 years old. Today's talk is a meditation on imagination, invention, and revision. By your leave, I'm going to suggest, through a mosaic of story, song, works of art, and literary hijinks, that the process we use to create better drafts of our work on the page is similar, although not identical, to the one we use to create a better version of the self. As a transgender woman, I suppose I have a unique understanding of what it's like to need to revise a life, to create a new draft of the person that I've been. But it's not really a process that's unique to people like me. We all do it, day by day, week by week, looking at who we are, asking ourselves, is this it? Is this who I'm supposed to be? If not, how do I go about creating that newer, better self? What will I have to risk? What will I have to give up in order to live that life? And are those risks and those losses worth enduring? What's worse, to risk losing your family, your friends, your job, really everything that you hold dear in order to become a truer self? Or is it better to live a little more safely to protect what you have and the people that love you, even if the price of doing so is enduring the profound sense that you are somehow inauthentic, that you are, in spite of everything, not quite yourself? And so to begin, I'd like to tell you a story about what it is like to live with the hard truth that the person you are is not the person you are meant to be. What is it like? It's not fun. So, by your leave, let's put a pin, as the young folks say, in Johann Gottlieb Goldberg for a moment, and instead allow me to tell you a story I call In the Early Morning Rain. One May morning, near the end of my 27th year, I loaded all my things into the Volkswagen and started driving north. All that year I'd been working on a novel, a work entitled The Invisible Woman, and it wasn't bad as these things go, but clearly it still needed another draft. I knew that there was something in the story that didn't work, but it was impossible for me to figure out what this was, the long months of work on the novel having left me blind to its good qualities as well as to its other ones. Making my task even more difficult was the fact that I was, in a similar way, blind to myself. The Maryland spring, what with its bursting tulips and cherry blossoms, wasn't helping me either. All of that rebirth and reinvention just seemed to remind me of the thing that I wasn't able to do with my own life. And so I headed north in the direction in which I knew, if I drove long enough, eventually I would come to some place where, like me, on and off the page, everything was still frozen. I wasn't sure what I was going to do then, but I was certain that something would occur to me that would end this transgender business once and for all. And so, I set my sights on Nova Scotia. I drove to Maine, and took a ferry out of Bar Harbor. I drove onto a ship called the SS Blue Nose and stood on the deck and watched America drift away behind me, which as far as I was concerned, was just fine. There was someone walking around in a rabbit costume on the ship. He'd pose with you, and then they'd snap your picture, and then an hour or so later, you could purchase a picture of yourself with the rabbit as a memento of your trip to Nova Scotia. I purchased mine. It showed a sad-looking boy with long hair reading a book of poetry as a moth-eaten rabbit bends over him. In Nova Scotia, I drove the car east and north for a few days. When dusk came, I'd eat in a diner, and then I'd sleep either in the car or in a tent that I had in the back. There were scattered patches of snow up there, even in May. I kept going north until I got to Cape Breton Island, which is about as far away as you can get from Baltimore and still be on dry land. In Cape Breton, I hiked around the cliffs, looked at the ocean. At night, I lay in my sleeping bag by the sea as breezes shook the tent. I wrote in my journal, or I read the poetry of Robert Frost, or grazed around in the modern library's great tales of horror and the supernatural. I read one up there with the title, "Oh, Whistle, and I'll Come to You, My Lad." In the car, I listened to a band called the Warlocks sing a song called "In the Early Morning Rain" on the tape deck, which is a song that goes, "In the early morning rain, with $1 in my hand, and an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand, I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved ones so. In the early morning rain, with no place to go." I thought about this girl I knew, Dee Dee Finney. I thought about my parents. I thought about the clear, inescapable fact that I was female in spirit and how, in order to be whole, I'd have to give up on every dream I'd ever had, except for one. I stayed in a motel one night that was officially closed for the season, but which the operator let me stay in for half price. I opened up my suitcase and I put on a bra and some jeans and a blue knit top. I combed my hair out and I looked in the mirror and I saw a relatively normal-looking young woman. "This is what's so wrong," I said to myself. "This is the cause of all the trouble." I thought about settling in one of the little villages around there, just starting life over again as a woman. I could tell everyone I was Canadian. Then I lay on my back and sobbed. Nobody would ever believe I was Canadian. The next morning, I climbed a mountain at the far northern edge of Cape Breton Island. I climbed up to the top, trying to clear my head, but it wouldn't clear. I kept going up and up past the tree line, past the shrub line, until at last there was just moss. And there I stood, looking out at the cold ocean, 1,000 miles below me, totally cut off from the world. A fierce wind blew in from the Atlantic, and I leaned into it. I saw the waves crashing against the cliff below. I stood right at the edge, and my heart pounded. I leaned over the edge of the precipice, but the gale blowing into my body kept me from falling. When the wind died down, I'd start to fall, then it would blow me back up again. I played a little game with the wind, leaning a little further over the edge each time. Then I leaned off the edge of the cliff at a sharp angle, my arms held outward like wings, my body sustained only by the fierce wind, and I thought, well, is this what you came here to do? Let's do that then. And then, a huge blast of wind blew me backwards, and I landed on the moss. It was soft. I stared up at the blue sky and I felt something. "Are you all right?" said the voice. "You're going to be all right." Looking back now, I don't know whose voice that was. My guardian angel? The ghost of my father? I don't know. Sometimes, though, I wonder whether it actually makes all that much difference to give a name to the spirits that are watching out for us. Still, from this vantage point, over 35 years later, my heart tells me that was the voice of my future self, the woman I eventually became, a woman who, all these years later, looks sort of like the woman I saw in the mirror in the motel. Looking back on that young man, I want to tell him, it will get better. It will not always hurt the way it hurts now. The thing that right now you feel is your great curse will someday, against all odds, turn out to be your great gift. It is hard to be gay or lesbian. To be trans can be harder. There have been plenty of times since then that I have lost all hope. But in the years since I heard that voice, I have found to my surprise, most people have treated me with love. Some of the people I most expected to lose when I came out as trans turned out to be loving and compassionate and kind. I can't tell you how to get here from there. You have to figure that out for yourself. But I do know that I didn't go off the cliff that morning. I walked back down the mountain and instead began the long, long journey toward home. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle comes to us from quantum physics. Dumbed down for popular culture, the principle suggests in a general way that the act of observing something changes the thing being observed. And it's a handy way of describing the difficulties of knowing anything for certain. On the page, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle describes the impossibility of experiencing your work the way a reader does. By which I mean to say that if you take your work through 6 or 7 drafts and you've read it, say, 100 times, it's impossible for you to know what it will be like for someone to read your work for the first time. The principle also describes some of the difficulty in knowing ourselves. If we Heisenberg ourselves too much, our own souls become vague and unknowable. And who, after all, do we examine more relentlessly than ourselves? But that doesn't mean we aren't going to try. Day by day, year by year, we keep Heisenberging as if asking ourselves the same questions over and over again will somehow make our hearts a little bit less mysterious. I remember being a teenager, high on multiple bong hits and staring into the mirror for so long that I no longer recognized the thing reflected as me. Which sounds just like another amazing drug tale, except for the fact that in this, I was not wrong. The person that I saw there was not me, not by a long shot. I would spend many of the years that followed resorting to one desperate measure after another in the hope, always monstrously improbable, that one day, against all odds, the reflection in the mirror would show my face. This would be a good moment, I think, to introduce you to my younger self, what I think of as one of my early drafts, here photographed at the Museum of Retired Ventriloquist Dummies, summer of 1982. I just love this photo because, well, in part because it's so bizarre, and in part because I remember the moment it was taken so clearly. It was a hot summer day during a road trip from Philadelphia to Portland, Oregon, to see my sister. I was so lost that year. By then I knew what I had to do in order to become myself, but I also knew I'd lacked the courage to actually do it. So instead, I was in this crazy nether existence. I felt a little bit like a ventriloquist dummy of my own self, a brain on a stick, a being without a body. The only thing I had of any substance or solidity was the hope of making art, the dream of telling stories that were, just like those dummies, haunting and comic, and just a little bit weird. Glenn Gould's version of the Goldberg Variations was released in 1955, and it rocked the classical music world. It remains one of the best-selling classical recordings of all time, and it made our man Glenn Gould a star. Part of this is the result of the recording's just sheer precociousness. He recorded it at the age of 22. It's full of Elvis Presley-style bravado, not least the fact that his recording of it was about twice as fast as any previous one. It was also remarkable because it took this piece that had been fairly obscure and reinvented it. Before this, the best-known version, recorded in 1933, was Wanda Landowska's, performed on harpsichord, the instrument for which Bach originally composed the piece. Let's listen to just a little piece of this as Wanda Landowska performed it in 1933. And as you listen, imagine you're a troubled Count Kaiserling, awake in the middle of the night, counting up your bastards. You've summoned your house harpsichordist, 14-year-old Johann Goldberg, to soothe your nerves. You tell him, "Hit it, Johann." Just a couple words on Wanda Landowska. 7 years after she recorded that piece, as the Germans approached Paris, she fled France with her lover, a young woman named Denise Resto. Believing the Nazi threat to be temporary, she left France with only 2 suitcases. Turns out, the Nazi threat wasn't temporary. Everything she left behind in France, including her instruments and her manuscripts, looted and destroyed. On what date did her ship arrive in America? That would be December 7th, 1941. For the next 18 years, she and Denise lived in Connecticut, and Wanda gave concerts around the country almost single-handedly reinventing the harpsichord as an instrument to take seriously. During a visit from the cellist Pablo Casals, the 2 musicians discussed some differing interpretations of Bach's work. They didn't agree. "Mon cher Paul," she said, "let us not fight anymore. You play Bach your way, and I'll play him his way." Now consider the thing that art historians call pentimenti. This refers to the existence of one painting beneath another. Sometimes these paintings are just sketches for the finished work, first drafts, if you like, before the final draft of paint goes on top. The word pentimenti is actually the plural of pentimento, which means to repent. When you think about it this way, it gives the idea of changing your mind as an artist almost a kind of moral gravity, as if any path other than the one that led to the final finished work is a path of sin, a path which we have to renounce in order to find the truth. So here's one. This is Edgar Degas' Portrait of a Woman. Here we see a middle-aged woman with a wise face looking off to our left, yet there's a darkness to it, right? As if the shadows of her own life are slowly enveloping her. If you didn't know better, you'd think that Degas here is presenting a complex psychological portrait, an emblem of the way darkness, whether in the form of our own mistakes and regrets, or even the inescapability of mortality, is creeping in on her. And to be honest, as a transgender woman, I can tell you, sometimes the person I have been darkens my portrait, my pictured self, a little bit. In part, this is because, being a woman who never had a girlhood, there are things I missed out on. Other times, it's simply that being trans is a hard life, and even on a good day, there are things I have to endure that a lot of other women don't have to put up with. Not the least of these is the way my identity is often a matter of argument, as if the fact of my existence is an argument which, who knows, I might yet still win or lose. So yeah, I look at this picture of this aging woman, her face full of determination, but darkness creeping in, and I think, exactly, Edgar, nailed it. But you'd be wrong about all of that, because that big black stain is really just another painting underneath this one bleeding through. An X-ray reveals this reconstructed version of the hidden painting, which is actually, I think, upside down. So the big black splotch you see back here, that's the hair over the ear there, reversed. It would be nice if this turns out to be the same model painted some years earlier, so that the darkness bleeding into the painting of the older woman is actually the ghost of her younger self, but turns out 2 different models. Degas just used the same canvas, turned it upside down, painted the second painting. And yet now, 100 years later, the earlier portrait haunts the older one. They might not originally have been intended to have been linked, but linked they are, in the same way you might wind up with a relative you never knew existed when you were growing up, but now, thanks to something like Ancestry.com, you're stuck with a whole bunch of new cousins. Look out, Edgar. They're coming over. All of which leads us to the classic philosophical puzzle known as the Ship of Theseus. Oh, I'm sorry, I just dozed off for a second. The Ship of Theseus. If you're already familiar with the Ship of Theseus, which is, to be honest, kind of an old chestnut in philosophy, then please forgive me, Harvard students. But here we are. Imagine your old friend Theseus has a ship, and as the years pass, the Athenians repair that ship as necessary by replacing the sails when they tear, the masts when they break, the boards on the deck when they warp. After, for instance, 10 years, let's say, everything on the ship has been replaced. So that would be the top, that's ship B up there, the new ship. So that raises the question of whether ship B is the same ship as the one that you began with. And if you want to get tricky, and of course we want to get tricky, you can raise the complication introduced by Thomas Hobbes, who asked, what if all the old pieces taken off the original ship are saved and then reassembled, so that now, after 10 years, there's 2 ships? So that would be ship C. Those are the pieces going to create ship C. So here are the 2 ships. One made of all the original pieces, which is all new, which Theseus sails, and the other ship. So in this puzzle we ask, which of these 2 is the true Ship of Theseus? Which one is authentic? Which one is real? Well, there's a lot of interesting ways of thinking about this puzzle. Noam Chomsky, just up the street, has a whole amazing theory of this, which I wish I, A, had time to explain to you, and B, that I understood. But for my purposes, the true Ship of Theseus it's the ship that Theseus sails. It's like the story of the old New England farmer who says, I've got the world's best shovel, it's guaranteed to last forever. I've replaced the blade twice and the handle 3 times. Great shovel, lasts forever. For writers, the question becomes, which is the true draft of Theseus? The first one, the one that came fresh from your brain, or the next one, the draft you arrived at after repeated readings, after the workshops, after all the ways you go about looking at your work and reconsidering it over time? Is that the draft that Theseus sails? Is that the book that Theseus writes? Is the revised version of a creative work always the most authentic version of that work? What do we do with the fact that all those repeated readings and reconsiderations of a story sometimes make us blind to what we've made? Is it possible that there's a very particular kind of uncertainty that challenges writers? That the more time you spend Heisenberging your story, the less you're able to actually improve that work, because all your effort makes it impossible to see it clearly. It's a harrowing truth for artists that sometimes, when you try with all your heart to make things better, sometimes you wind up making them 100 times worse. I know trans men and trans women, too, for whose revised selves and revised lives fall well short of their hopes. And yet, even for those who lose everything, families, jobs, marriages, children, homes, even among these, I don't know a single soul who regrets the transition. Because, of course, usually it wasn't the transition itself that disappointed. It was all those friends and lovers who, at the moment they were most needed, closed their hearts and vanished. While we're on that point, let's pay a quick visit to Borja, Spain. Here's the fresco called Ecce Homo, painted in 1930 by Elias Garcia Martinez. But it was badly deteriorated, as you can see, by 2012, and an amateur 85-year-old art restorer named Cecilia Jimenez started work on the piece. Her work, to say the least, was epic. Thanks in part to the always dependable internet, the restoration was mocked by people around the world. It was said that the savior had been transformed, among other things, into a blurry monkey. Senora Jimenez claims she had only just started doing the work when she took a vacation, but by the time she got back, the scandal had broken and the church stopped her. Senora Jimenez says she felt humiliated. And yet, something amazing has happened since then. The Sanctuary of Mercy Church, featuring the botched restoration, has now become a tourist destination. The boom in tourism has allowed restaurants and museums in the little town of Borja to thrive. For €2, you can buy a pen with the image on it. For €7, you can buy a coffee mug. For €11 a bottle, you can buy some wine that features the revised Ecce Homo on the label. In 2016, a new museum just about the painting and its revision opened up. So, in every way, the revised and admittedly more terrible version of the fresco has become more popular than the original. Senora Jimenez has even changed her outlook on the painting. Quote, "I've gone to a psychiatrist," she says. "Now I take medication and I feel better. Now I look at the painting and I think, it's okay, he's not so ugly. I hold him so dear. Now I see him as handsome." So, you have to ask, which is the true Ecce Homo? If you follow the logic of the ship of Theseus paradox, do we have to conclude that the true one is this one, the shittier but much more beloved one? Or is it possible that multiple Ecce Homos exist? The shitty one beloved in the Sanctuary of Mercy, and the original one, which now exists only in our memory. All of this reminds me a little bit of the story of the writer James Thurber, who met a woman at a party in Paris and said, "Mr. Thurber, I believe your stories are much funnier in French than in English." "It's true," Thurber said. "They tend to lose something in the original." Two years before I headed north to take my life in Nova Scotia, I arrived at the writing seminars of Johns Hopkins University, bearing a box of books, a Kaypro word processor. Well, there's a small little ripple of energy among some of us of a certain generation. A Kaypro word processor, and a long blonde wig I kept hidden in a box in the closet. We were told upon our arrival to call our professor, John Barth, by his nickname, Jack. But I couldn't imagine doing this any more than I might imagine addressing Edgar Allan Poe as Eddie. The high watermark of maximalism in American literature had come and gone by the fall of 1985. By then, my peers mostly dreamed of becoming Raymond Carver, or Ann Beattie, perhaps. Still, Barth remained right up there with Borges, Pynchon, or Calvino, postmodern authors whose work combined parody, self-consciousness, and a sense that a novel might be, among other things, a comment upon itself. In one class, Jack unveiled his theory of plot. It is, he said, the incremental perturbation of an unstable homeostatic system and its catastrophic restoration to a new and complexified equilibrium. Yay! So that sounds funny, right? Because it's just such a word salad. It's such, academic argle-bargle. And yet, if you look at it, it actually describes a thing that you're all familiar with, which is the way in which a story begins with a set of relationships between people, and those relationships are generally somewhat unstable. And then slowly those set of relationships are disturbed to a point where something happens, and Act 2 begins. And now we seek to restore those relationships in a new way. So that's the complexified equilibrium at the end of the story. Anyway, it's quite a thing. Anyway, Jack liked drawing a parallel between the structure of dramatic action and that of other things, a love affair, not least. I can see his big round head, even now, smiling wickedly at me, saying, "There's a reason they call it a climax, Boylan." In those days, I lived a double life, female out of the classroom, male when I was on the campus. It was a complexified equilibrium, all right. In the workshop, I was working on a novel called The Invisible Woman, a story that was meant to be Barthian in its comic self-referentiality, but which in the end turned out to be Boylan-esque. A tale of a woman who had to keep herself hidden lest the unforgiving world discover her identity. It would take me years to understand the obvious. I wasn't writing a novel, but a memoir, and the woman in hiding that I was describing was, of course, myself. It wasn't a very good novel, but Barth, my teacher, shepherded me through it anyway, using his abundant gifts of erudition and love. I learned a lot about writing from him, to be sure, but even more, I learned about revision. Given that survival in the world is so often about this thing we're talking about, learning how to successfully rewrite our own selves, it may be that in the end, my teacher taught me less about creating fiction than in how to invent myself, which was a skill that in years to come would quite literally save my life. On the 40th anniversary of the founding of Hopkins's writing seminars, the university staged a formal reading by the program's professors. That was the first time I heard John Barth read the story entitled Night Sea Journey, a tale which was narrated by a sperm. The voice of a sperm was actually the last narrator in the world that I was concerned with, given the nighttime journey I was undertaking in the streets of Baltimore. But still, there was plenty in that narrative that spoke to me, not least the part that goes, this is the sperm talking now. I've begun to believe that she exists, that she lies not far ahead and stills the sea and draws me her word. Aghast, I recollect the maddest notion that our destination, which exists, mind you, in but one night sea out of hundreds and thousands, is no shore, as commonly conceived, but a mysterious being, indescribable except by paradox and vaguest figure, wholly different from us swimmers, yet our complement, the death of us, yet our salvation and resurrection, simultaneously our journey's end, midpoint, and commencement, not membered and thrashing like us, but a motionless or hugely gliding sphere of unimaginable dimension, self-contained, yet dependent absolutely in some wise upon the chance, always monstrously improbable, that one of us will survive the night sea journey and reach her. Well, I did reach her in the end, if by her I can refer to my own female self, the self I embraced and unveiled to the world in my late 30s and early 40s, a woman who was welcomed with unexpected grace by my friends and colleagues and my family. Somehow I found the very thing that the narrator of Night Sea Journey tries to forswear at its conclusion, an unrefusable summons of love, love, love. Sometimes I've been asked how I made that transition. I can only say that above all else, the most important way I found of making sense of my life was by seeing it as a story, by finding the thread of narrative that brought sense and reason to what otherwise felt like chaos. When I was young, I'd found my life perturbed incrementally by the implausible truth of my embodiment. Finally, at its dramatic climax, I arrived at the miracle of my catastrophic restoration and a new and complexified equilibrium. Embracing my identity, I came to understand, was less about gender and more about genre, that the life I was living needed to be truth, not fiction. And in order to live that truth, I needed to get on with the daunting prospect of creating my own next draft. I wasn't sure how Jack would react to the news of my transformation. While I thought of him, or at least his characters, as sexually adventurous, transgender issues in those days were still seen as erotic and, I meant to say exotic. Well, maybe we'll go with erotic, who knows? But certainly inscrutable, even by the liberal and open-hearted. At last, one day, I got a lovely little email from him. In response to my memoir, which was titled She's Not There, he wrote, "I should say she is very much there, Boylan, or should I say, girl land." You see what he did there? That little pun on my own name, and its loving acknowledgement that I had indeed moved from boy land to girl land. That was Barthian. That was Barthian to the core. A few years after that, Colby College, where I was then a member of the faculty, gave Jack an honorary degree. And there we were. After all those years, together again, teacher and student, writer and writer. At a celebratory dinner the night before commencement, Jack addressed the faculty, and part of his address concerned thinking of our lives as stories, the very process that had saved me, both in and out of the classroom, half a lifetime before. Reviewing his definition of plot, he said, "It is all together now, Boylan. The gradual perturbation of an unstable homeostatic system and its catastrophic restoration to a new and complexified equilibrium." And I said it word for word along with Barth. I closed my eyes, and for a short, strange moment, there I was, a student again, still young, all the triumph and turmoil of life still far ahead. He returned to the table from the podium and embraced me. "Nicely done, Jack," I said. He replied, "Nicely done yourself, girl land." I should have just let go of him, let him return to his chair. But instead, I held him in my arms just a little bit longer. That great, kind genius of American literature, my teacher. And I thought, well, what else would you think about your teacher? Love, love, love. Before I take my leave of you, let's visit Glenn Gould one time. Remember this? It's a talk about Glenn Gould. In 1981, at the age of 49, Gould returned to the Goldberg Variations. He said of at least one of the variations that he had recorded in his youth, he could no longer recognize the person who had played it. So he recorded it again, his most famous piece, not at the breakneck, perhaps show-offy version of a 22-year-old, but with the autumnal wisdom of a man approaching old age. Okay, so one more time, just let's listen to that aria as he played it at age 22. Here's how he played it in 1981, over 30 years later. He would die less than 1 year later, at the age of 50. Hermann Karl von Keyserling, for whom J.S. Bach wrote the Goldberg Variations, was once described as a cheerful man of sin who kept a harem of ladies, had 354 bastards, his chief mistress was a daughter, and he died drunk. It's also said that he had trouble sleeping at night, which is understandable if you have 354 bastards. It's just 11 bastards short of one bastard for every day of the year. You can imagine the Count tossing and turning at night, wondering which bastard was going to show up next. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, get out of here. Go on. Stop. You're killing me. Look at you all. Look at you all. For God's sakes. You're going to make me cry again. Thank you. Whew. Thank you. Why don't we get Richard Russo up here? Come on, Rick. A man whose current draft is surely his best. Thanks, Russo. God, you see that? I made myself cry early on. That was exciting. It's always an interesting move, whether it's good pedagogically, to start weeping in front of an audience.
Well, you made me blurry too on several occasions during that wonderful talk. I have all sorts of questions for you here, and some of them now because this lecture that you just gave exists so much at the level of metaphor. I'm a little bit concerned that some of my questions here. I wish I'd heard this before making notes about what we were going to talk about.
Sneaky of me, wasn't it?
Because some of the questions that I have for you seem pretty literal after that highly metaphorical lecture. But we can. I'm sure we'll arrive back at metaphor on any number of occasions.
You know what we should talk about? So right now I'm reading this Barbara Kingsolver novel, Demon Copperhead, which is itself a set of variations on David Copperfield, the Dickens novel, of course. I love Charles Dickens, but I don't know anybody who loves Charles Dickens more than you do. And we have a lot of banter talking about things that we share in our love of Dickens.
Ever the best of friends.
Ever the best of friends.
Ain't us, Pip.
But we've talked about the ending of Great Expectations. So I'll start with a question for you, in fact.
That was one of the questions I was going to be directing at you. That's good.
Let's go for it.
Let's start there. But I think what happens, as some of you know, with Great Expectations, it was published, and after it came out, not the next day or anything like that. Who was it that suggested to him that he had the ending wrong?
It was Edward Bulwer-Lytton, famous as being now only famous for being one of the worst writers of the 19th century. In fact, the Edward Bulwer-Lytton contest is a contest every year for the worst opening sentence. He's the man who wrote "It was a dark and stormy night." Literally, that was which made famous by Snoopy, actually, another one of our famous American novelists.
Right.
But he suggested what?
Well, he based. I mean, the simplest way to say it is that he suggested. He didn't say it in so many words, but he suggested that Dickens got the ending wrong. It's
a sad ending.
And that's what he said. He got the ending wrong. He implied that he got the ending wrong because the ending was too sad, and that Pip and Estella, after all they'd been through, deserved more than that.
In the original ending, they meet at the end of the book, and they have a sad little meeting on the streets of London, in Piccadilly, in fact.
Right.
And off they go and
They're,
he
they're separate ways.
he sees
basically.
that
Yeah.
the years have been hard on her, and he hopes the hope is that now she knows what was in his heart. That now that she's suffered over
Right.
the years, now she knows how he suffered when he was in love with her.
Well, so imagine, if you will, what it would be like as a writer to pen a masterpiece and be told after the fact that you got the ending wrong.
And to be told by one of the worst
And,
writers.
and be told by one of the worst writers alive at the time that you got the ending wrong. And apparently, for you as a writer, Dickens as a writer, because if Edward Bulwer Lytton were wrong, then you just say fuck off, right? There's no particular reason for you to take any of that to heart. But Dickens must have, because he did. I mean, he wrote that new ending, which was embraced by readers, I think, largely. Although there for a long time there were everybody said, or not everybody said, a lot of people said, no, why would you do that? Why would you write this happier ending? We should describe I don't think it is a happy ending, but what does happen is that Pip and Estella meet again, but they meet at Miss Havisham's, if I have it correct.
Right, whose house is now in ruins.
Whose house is now in ruins, as it deserves to be.
Yeah.
and they meet there. The site of their mutual harrowing experience, and the suggestion is that in some way, not that they're going to go off and have a wonderful, happy life together, but there is something in that they belong together in some metaphorical way.
As we sat there, I saw in my heart no shadow of a future parting from
Right.
her.
Exactly. Well done. So yeah, and so there's
So which is the true ending?
So which is the true ending? Which is the true ship of Theseus here?
The ship of Dickens.
Which is the true ending? Now, I always thought, and I still think, that the ending that Dickens revised, that's the one that speaks to me most. Maybe that says more about me than about Dickens or about the ending, but I have this congenital optimism, and that particular ending speaks to. But what I was surprised by was that several other novelists, including John Irving, also agreed that no, he got it right the second time, not the first time. Which is not to say that resolves anything, but it does raise interesting questions about collaboration, doesn't it? Even if it's collaboration after the fact, even if somebody just comes in and says to you at some point after the book is published, and I don't know about you, but with me, after the book is published, I'm just so glad to be done with that damn thing.
We're on to the next one.
We're not going anywhere
Well,
near
I
any
think
of that again.
it must have nagged at him. It must, and when you fall in love with your characters, he must have known in his heart that he'd not done well by them, or that he could do better. And I don't know. Maybe he just thought it would be kind of an interesting experiment. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
He might have just said, "Well, let's give it a whirl." I'm not sure if I agree with Mr. Lytton, but
have you ever written a book of yours? Have you ever thought, well, maybe I should have done the ending differently? Have you ever wanted to revise anything serious about one of your books?
There are two answers to that. The short one is no, and the longer one is yes, every single book. Because I have such a narrow bandwidth, I'm only interested in 3 or 4 things. And with each novel of mine, somewhere along the line, I realize that this book didn't get to the heart of what I had hoped it would get to. And usually it's the result of something technical that I've done. I've chosen to write the book in first person, and therefore there are certain things that I don't have access to because I've chosen to write it in first person. A third person, limited, would have allowed me to go somewhere that this book didn't, and so my next book becomes that book.
Right.
But then when I go to third person, so I go after the same themes, the same interests, in the second book, which is now in close third person, which also makes me realize about 2/3 of the way through, as always happens, that now because I've chosen this, there's also something technically that I can't do in that. But I think to myself, my God, what this needed was an omniscient narrator. And so each book of mine contains some sort of seed of imperfection that typically will result in a new book asking many of the same questions with no more chance with the third book or the fourth book or the fifth book of ever getting to the true ship of Theseus.
Right.
Is that square with anything that?
I'm thinking of a conversation, now this is going to sound like name dropping, because it was in fact with Tabitha and Stephen King, that he was complaining that he couldn't figure out where the ending of a book was. You know, he was on page 900 and he was still working on it. And she was kind of rolling her eyes and saying, you know what's going to happen because it's what always happens. You realize that the book ended at page 800 and you wrote past it.
Yep.
And I think it's a thing that writers do that often we're afraid that readers won't get it. Mm-hmm. So we go on for an extra 100 pages or so, or 50 pages or whatever, just to make sure that. So instead, what you often realized what you needed to do was leave it subtle, which is, I guess, maybe that's an argument for the original ending of Great Expectations. Actually, is the first ending, the more subtle ending.
I have written past the ending a couple of times. The most memorably with my novel Straight Man, which
is shortly to be a series on what? AMC?
On AMC.
Yes. Look, he's just trying to go right by that.
But that novel ends with a group of academics who have gone into a very small room, and they're trying to cheer up a colleague who's had some sort of cardiac event, as I recall, it's from a long time ago. But a bunch of people crowd into the room, and when it comes time for them to leave, they all turn to leave at once, and they don't recognize the fact that the door opens inward. And they just keep pressing on each other. And of course, there's no way that any of them can ever get out of this enclosed space until they can cooperate. But the whole book is about them not being able to cooperate. And I wrote another chapter beyond that, or part of a chapter,
right,
and realized, no, that's right where the book ends, with these people who have never ever been able to
school for the gifted.
Yep. So yeah, I have. But well, let me return to Glenn Gould for a second and approach it in a slightly different way. Do you have a preference for the early Glenn Gould or the later?
Well, I always thought I liked the early one.
Yeah.
Because that's the rock and roll version. I mean, that's the 55, 22-year-old. That's the young Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
Until I started doing this talk.
Yeah.
And and originally when I thought before I realized exactly how long this talk was turning into, I had so many different versions of the Goldbergs I was going to play for you, now I think I'm bending toward the later ones, the 1981 version, and it might simply be because I'm in my 60s. You know, I'm 14 years older than Glenn Gould ever got to be.
Yeah.
So sometimes what we see in art is not the artist or even the composer, but what we see is ourselves. And what I'm seeing in that slow, mournful, wiser version is myself. And maybe there's a lesson in it for me too, is that sometimes, you know, when you're young, you really want to show off. Mm-hmm. I think young writers, you really want to you want to let people know you've arrived.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more for one thing, I'm here. So everybody knows I'm here. So that's not news. And I'm more willing to have my voice be quieter, more subtle. So I think I like the older one better.
Well, I know I did that one. It was the second one that near the end of your talk had me misting up again, because I agree. It seemed to me that version bore the entire weight of whatever. Well, I mean, part of it is wisdom, as you say, but it also seemed to reveal or carried the weight of whatever suffering had taken place
Yeah.
between the first recording and the second recording. And part of it, is as an artist now, he doesn't have to show off anymore.
Right. Because we know, because
But-
he's Glenn
but-
Gould.
But part of it is that he's revealing a different self to his audience, and what could be more appropriate given those years that have elapsed,
Yeah.
that he shows a different Glenn Gould than the earlier one. Yeah, that's the one that killed me
Yeah.
In this. Well, let's talk a little bit then.
Are there audience questions, Rick?
Let's see. What are we doing? Well, we probably should.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, we
What do you think?
probably should. I had several other things I want to ask you. Let's see here.
Well, maybe you can ask one of your questions and pretend
okay.
it was from the audience.
I don't think you want to answer that one.
Oh, I like that laugh.
All right. Well, let's go to one of the easy. Let's go to a couple of fairly easy ones here. Well, actually, no. I'm going to give you this one because this is the one that kills me every time somebody asks me this question. I never have an answer for it. So let's see if you can answer this.
And by the way, will you keep me from going on and on and on like I always do?
No. Have I ever been able to?
No.
What books are on your nightstand?
Well, I'm reading the Barbara Kingsolver. That one was easy.
Okay, all right.
And I just read Rebecca Mackay's. I forget the title of the book. But it was,
I have some news for
no,
you,
that's the new
something-
one.
That's the
It's-
new
it's
one.
the old one.
Oh, yes.
About
The
AIDS
Great
crisis.
Believers?
Yeah, The Great Believers.
The Great, what a stunning.
And I also read Celeste Ng's new book.
Uh-huh.
So those are the three.
And the new one, you do not want to miss the new Rebecca Mackay.
Because you got a sneak
yes,
peek.
I snared a copy of that from my daughter's bookstore.
So that wasn't so hard.
No. Okay. What writers inspire you?
Well, it's funny, when I was, this is the weirdest thing. When I was a teenager, what I wanted to be was James Thurber. I wanted to be I wanted to be a wry New Yorker writer of the 1930s. Mm-hmm. Why that was a thing, I don't know. I guess humor appealed to me. I wanted to write comic short stories, and I think I was driven towards humor because the world felt just so weird to me. And what's funny, in spite of being trans has been hard and given me this just very hard, weird life. But at the same time, it's also drove me to have a sense of humor. And I've inherited a sense of optimism from my mother too. So I've always been funny, or at least thought that I was funny. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be one of those writers. And as I don't know if this was a misfortune. In my 20s, I just fell into the kind of postmodern world of John Barth, Italo Calvino, Pynchon, Borges. I wanted to be one of those people.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really smart enough to be one of those people, or I just wasn't. I don't know.
They're all very cerebral writers,
and it was not a good model for me because because I couldn't reveal what was in my heart. I thought that if I could write something that was wise and clever and agile enough, that would just amaze everybody, and it would kind of keep everyone's attention away from the fact that the writer was essentially playing hide and go seek. That there was a kind of there was a real playfulness and a funniness, but there was an emotional center that was missing.
Right.
So in a way, I wonder if those were good people for me to be reading then. But those are the people that I read.
Right.
And
there's, I used to, back when I was teaching more than I teach now, I used to every now and then remind students that sometimes a book, you can write a book or you can read a book that challenges you intellectually and breaks your heart, and you have some sort of visceral gut reaction to. But it's very hard to write that book if you're trying to hit all three of those targets at the same time, right? So you're much more likely to hit all three of those targets if you decide what your primary target is. And I think all of those writers were all going for headshots.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you have always been the kind of writer who's trying to get to the literally to the heart of the matter. And that's always the camp that I have been in as well.
And I
think
think
we recognize that.
I think if you're
about each
trying,
other.
I was trying too hard to be entertaining and not hard enough to be honest, because I was afraid if I was being honest was boring.
Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe I just didn't want to.
I worried about the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last thing in the world that I wanted to be was boring. Let me ask you one final question here, because we are coming up on the end here. Is there a danger, as you say, of this of constantly reinventing the self? I mean, that seems in the in the most general way about the best thing that could happen to a writer, to any kind of artist, but also any kind of human being, that if you're always revising, what you're doing is opening yourself to new experiences, to new understanding. And this idea of revising and revising and revising, are there any dangers to that?
Yeah, I think so, because I think I think about somebody like Madonna, who the thing that we love about Madonna, and there are other artists like that, but she's the one that comes right to mind.
Reinvention
people love
is
that
her
there's a
middle
new,
name.
or
Yeah.
David Bowie, who is he
Yep.
going to be now?
Yeah.
You know, or Dylan is another good example. That they keep kind of becoming these new versions, and I used to always resist some of those performers and artists because for me, coming up with a new self was not about, there was no playfulness in it for me. That, like, for me, coming up with a true self came at such a high price.
Yeah.
And that the idea that you would just, give yourself a new name and have a new personality, because it was all, RuPaul says all life is drag. Well, I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Maybe if you're a drag performer, it is.
Yeah.
But for me, the quest was to find the true self, and then be that self. But that's where the fault, or where the danger lies, because then, one, you become boring. What if the true self you come up with is somebody that is just, terrible? Have you had this experience where you have a friend who, someone says, "Well, that wasn't my true self. This is my true self," and you're like, "Well,
Some of those people have been murderers.
Yeah,
actually.
I kind of like, yeah." I want to say this so carefully. I've had the experience of many good friends who were addicts, and during their days as addicts, they were entertaining as all hell.
Yeah.
And then they get sober, and they're not fun anymore. Well, who would not prefer their friend alive than dead? No one. But there's this evil little thing in the back of your mind where it's like, is this the true self?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it is, in fact, and thank God that they have found that. But I think maybe, I guess, I yearn for the search for a true self to be a matter of play rather than a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
But it is what it is for me, and that it is something else for other people is perfectly fine. I mean, there are a lot of ways to be human.
Have you gotten to the point yet, as I have? I'm a decade older than you are, but I've gotten to the point now where every now and then I stop and say to myself, do you really believe this? Or have you just been saying it for 40 years?
Jericho Brown gave a poetry reading here at Harvard in the fall, and he said the most haunting thing. He said, when I do a revision of a poem, I look at it and I think, do you really believe that?
Yeah.
If you don't believe that, take it out of the poem. And if you do believe it, ask yourself, can I live up to that?
Yeah.
Can I live that truth? And I just thought, oh my God, that's a high standard to live up to.
Indeed.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Well, I want to say to you, Jennifer, thank you so much for that lovely lecture. You opened my heart.
you're killing me.
And I think I probably speak for the audience in saying that you did the same for them.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks as well to Richard for joining Jennifer in conversation and to all of you for being here. Good evening.